I see in 10 years a better integrated Africa with a wider market where people can travel everywhere without restriction. A wider market with better infrastructure linking us, both in terms of rail, in terms of air travel, but also in terms of water navigation facilities to be able to link our markets. I would see in 10 years an Africa that finally was able to feed itself, that's able to take advantage of all of the resources that it has, a more competitive Africa on the global market. In 10 years, I expect to see an Africa that is totally lit up with light, universal access to electricity, an Africa that is not in darkness, an Africa that is in light all through and through. That is what 10 years will look for me. I'm very excited about what I'm doing as president of the African Development Bank. When I was elected the president, the 8th president of the bank, I did say very clearly that we were going to work on 5 critical issues, which I felt were the most important challenges facing Africa. One of that, of course, is to light up and empower Africa. The second one was to make sure we can feed Africa. The third one is that we can integrate Africa. Fourth one is that we will industrialize Africa. And finally, the most important thing, where the rubber meets the road, is that we will improve the quality of life for the people of Africa. So I hit the ground here, running with all the staff and all the colleagues and the board of directors here, and also concerning all the countries themselves and other development partners, continuing to emphasize why these 5 areas are very, very critical. So you can imagine I've been extremely busy over the last 6 months. Well, first is, let me say I'm terribly excited. There's so much energy around these 5 areas. We call them high fives now in the bank. In heads of state also call them high fives. So that's really very exciting for me. But also we've been able to engage the culture within the bank to become much more development impact oriented. We want to be a first-rate bank that delivers impact at scale in Africa. And we want to be that bank of reference, that bank of choice for our regional member countries. I think we're on the right path for that. In the last 6 months also, we've been engaged in trying to form global alliances around these 5 major areas. COP21 in Paris, where the African Development Bank played a huge role in bringing together African countries, African leaders. We even helped to put up a huge Africa pavilion in Paris, which was very much appreciated by everybody. We supported the African group of negotiators, and so they were able to really push for what was in the interest of Africa in the final communique. We were also able to launch at that event what's called the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative, where the African Development Bank took the leadership role in helping to create this. And this is going to provide about 300 gigawatts of electricity by 2030, all across Africa. The other one that comes to my mind about our big role has also been on agriculture. That's my background. When I became president, within the first 2 weeks, I called for a big meeting around agriculture, attended by, well over 62 ministers of finance, central bank governors, and ministers of agriculture. We've been able to mobilize the ministers of finance now to understand that agriculture is not a way of life, that agriculture is a business, and is central to how they do macroeconomic and fiscal stabilization of their countries. The bank at the World Economic Forum in January this year, we formed and launched what is called the Transformative Partnership on Energy for Africa, that brought together all the global leaders, global CEOs on energy, heads of state, but also our partners like the US government, Power Africa Initiative, the UK government initiative, the UN Secretary General's initiative on sustainable energy for all, and a whole platform of partners to work together to really solve that energy problem for Africa. We still have well over 645 million Africans that don't have access to electricity. And as I've continued to say, Africa is totally tired of being in the dark, right? How much thinking can you do in the dark? How much industrialization can you do in the dark? How much competitiveness can you do in the dark? You can't. And so we determined as the African Development Bank to continue to push the envelope on that. That's going pretty well. We've gone to our board of directors with our plan for lighting up and empowering Africa. In December last year, all the rating agencies rated the bank, again, AAA, rated, which is fantastic, which means we can mobilize a lot more money globally to be able to do more for our countries. And so that is what we are going to focus on, be more business-driven, make sure we can actually mobilize more resources to help African countries. So, for the business development model, what we're saying is that we will want to have the right people in the right job and make sure that we also provide the capacity building for people to be able to do their jobs well. Some of our processes take a long time, I can tell you that, and I don't want a bank that is an elephant. I want a bank that's like a lion that's able to hunt and do things very fast, and that requires that we change our internal systems to be able to do that, and so we are on top of that. We are going to do that. But you will see that at the end of our reform process, it will be a reform process with a very sharp focus. Work for your clients, be closer to them, be more efficient, be more effective, right? Get impact done, but work a lot with others. A bank that is the bank of choice in Africa for development, that's what we're going to be. We plan to put on ground top leadership on ground. We plan to have, senior managers. We're planning to have, of course, that will have to be all approved by our board of directors. But the point is, have senior leadership on the ground. So I want the bank to do a lot more on girls' education, making sure that we can get our girls into school, stay in school, achieve in school, and also make sure that the school environment it's one where they can be free without having to be having, a sexual harassment or any kind of molestation, so they can learn in peace and quiet. And that is very, very important. But also, we shouldn't be having early marriages because early marriages deprive economies. Thirdly, I really think when it comes to getting Africa going, believe me, it's the women that make it, bouge, as they say in French. Why do I say that? Most of the businesses you see in Africa today that are small and medium-sized enterprises are owned by women. We were doing two things. First is to create what is called an affirmative finance action for women. This is to leverage $3 billion of financing for women alone in Africa. I wish I could do so for men, but I think that women's situation is so compelling. 97% of the women that you give loans to, they pay it back. And so I think it's very important to continue to support them. So the African Development Bank is currently putting this together to leverage $3 billion of support just for women, women businesses and women entrepreneurs in Africa. The second thing, which I think is very important for women, is the fact that today, 700 million Africans don't have access to clean cooking energy. And, 600,000 of them die every year. 50% of those are women, and 50% are children under the age of 5. No, I said that is not acceptable. That's why we have decided that we're going to work with our partners to create what we call the bottom of the pyramid energy financing facility for Africa that will allow all those 700 million people to have access to clean cooking energy. I don't see my position as president of the bank as a job. It's not a job at all. It's a mission. It's a mission to help with all of my colleagues and other partners to unlock opportunities for Africa, for that little child that is sitting in a little village somewhere that needs to go to school, for the women and girls that need access to water, for those that need access to good medication, to small businesses that need access to money, to a lot of Africans that need to have access to electricity, and to look at our continent, so rich, with a lot of water, cheap labor, great sunshine, almost anything you grow in Africa, you throw it up, before it hits the ground, it can grow. That's how God has blessed Africa. Now, I am driven constantly by a greater ambition for Africa. This can be a greater continent. This can be a continent where we can able to create a lot of massive amount of jobs. I want us to develop Africa with pride, a sense of confidence that finally Africa turned the corner. That's what drives me every single day. So it's not a job, it's a mission.